we had a little chat about Sankhya and Gita. But you see, as I said always, this has been one of the blunders that we normally make when we read Sri Aurobindo. Just as we have had the attitude to the Bhagavad Gita, many of us have the same attitude when they read essays on the Gita. So essays on the Gita, I have read it. समझ भी आ गया, कोई ज़्यादा कुछ प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. Life Divine and Savitri are difficult, but essays तो चलता है, kind of dal bhat. But as I say, if you really want to read the essays on the Gita, you really need to know a lot, because there's so much of thought compacted into each sentence and each para. At least I for one get arrested with every sentence. So we cannot just skim over saying, no, essays on the Gita is okay. I mean, we have read the Bhagavad Gita and essays on the Gita is a follow-up. On the contrary, it takes a lot of time and energy and thinking and understanding of this book too. That's why I am bringing out some of the main features, because otherwise you will not be able to appreciate, as I said before too, even the essays. And then once you read the essays on the Gita, you go back to the Bhagavad Gita, then you understand, my God, there's so much into it which we never knew. So that way it is a kind of an appreciation of the original Gita too, comes in only when we read well and in depth the essays on the Gita. Now coming to the same para which we sort of got arrested midway, but now reading the same line you will understand better. When the Gita speaks of Sankhya and Yoga, we shall not discuss beyond the limits of what is just essential for our statement. Now the relations of the Sankhya of the Gita with one Purusha and strong Vedantic coloring of the non-theistic or atheistic Sankhya. Now you see, if we have this question of the non-theistic, we were discussing the question of this many Purushas, but you will also see another problem with the Sankhya, which is rejected both by the Gita of the Yoga and the integral Yoga. It is atheistic. If you just say there is only a Purusha and a Prakriti, where is the divine? Where is the Brahman? Where is the Purushottama? Nowhere. So Sankhya per se becomes atheistic or non-theistic, as he calls it. So this is another problem that the Gita could not accept. Obviously, because Gita introduces what we said yesterday, theism. Theism in the true sense. Of course, in the Vedic times we had the belief in the Vedic gods, we had the belief in the pantheistic gods, but now this kind of a theism, anti-theism which is there in Sankhya, has to be overcome by Gita, because Gita is there to establish the Purushottama. And for that, we see this question that Sankhya's second blunder, or second loophole we may say, or a kind of little drawback if not a blunder. First one was a blunder, but this is more a loophole, wherein Gita again rejects, so Sri Aurobindo writes here, this question of the non-theistic or atheistic Sankhya that has come down to us, bringing with it its scheme of many Purushas. So this question of many Purushas is rejected. The question of non-theism or atheism is rejected from the Sankhya. And one Prakriti, nor of the Gita of the Yoga, many-sided, subtle, rich and flexible to the theistic doctrine and the fixed, scientific, rigorously defined and graded system of Yoga Patanjali. This is Sri Aurobindo is telling us here that I am not going to go deep into the theistic aspect of the yoga of the Gita. Because if you really take up the Gita and follow its many theistic ways. That means how to worship the divine, do this and do that. Because there's a whole Sri Krishna, Hare Rama, Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama movement that has started on the Bhagavad Gita basis. So that is extreme theism. Again, you formalize. But very interestingly, you must have noted, up until the birth of Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, we didn't have any kind of a ism of Sri Krishna. So this is the first time that Sri Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita have been turned into an ism. Till now, Bhagavad Gita was a way of teaching, a way of learning, a way of life. And it had lots of solutions to the problems of life per se. But unfortunately, this Hare Rama made it into an ism, which is not really true to the Bhagavad Gita spirit. You see, this is the greatness, or this is maybe we can say the parameter of a spiritual teaching, that it should never be turned into an ism and a creed. So Vedas, no creed. Upanishads, no creed. Gita, no creed, until the unfortunate movement of Hare Rama, Hare Krishna. So we in Indian spirituality, true to Indian spirituality, this was done by an Indian in the West, because I'm sure he thought that the Westerners were really attracted to all these theistic movements of puja and all that, and ceremonies, which is true. Even now I've seen, last year I was in Germany, Western people are attracted to a lot of this Indian ceremonies, Indian pujas, because they find it so novel. Because in Christianity there are pujas and ceremonies, but in a different way. So in order to attract the Westerners, our own Vedantic societies are creating or inventing some kind of a ceremony, and which the Western mind laps up very eagerly, because as somebody from, where was she? From England perhaps? She said, Ananda, tell us some of the ceremonies that are there in the integral yoga, because we would like to do and follow. Because Christianity and every religion has trained them so much to follow this and that and that. Same thing in India. But so these people have brought out so many ceremonies and rituals. And that's how I suppose this Hare Rama Krishna was invented, in order to really give it to the West. But we in India do not have this kind of a Hare Rama, this kind of a Gita creed. The Gita is a teaching, it's a way of life. So unfortunately that has come in. So Sri Aurobindo says, I will not get into any of these ritualistic movements or ritualistic ideas or ritualistic practices that are based on the Gita. Then he's telling us, in the Gita, the Sankhya and Yoga are evidently only two convergent parts of the same Vedantic truth. Well, now that we have dealt with the Sankhya, we have to deal with Yoga. Now here Yoga is basically Patanjali Yoga. What we had in the ancient times was Sankhya and Yoga. Normally we always say Sankhya Yoga. It's almost one word now. Because Yoga gives us the practical side of Sankhya. That's where they are inseparable. You cannot have Sankhya just per se. It has to be collaborated with Yoga, which gives, as Sri Aurobindo himself has given wonderful description of that. He says there are two concurrent ways of approaching its realization. The one philosophical, intellectual, analytical. That is the Sankhya. And the Yoga is intuitional, devotional, practical, ethical, synthetic, reaching knowledge through experience. So Yoga, as given to us by Patanjali, is a practical approach, devotional approach, intuitive approach, but based on the philosophy of Sankhya. So in Yoga also, what is the ideal? To realize your witness Purusha. And how to go about it? They use the Hatha Yoga, They use the Raja Yoga meditation method, and they also use the pranayama. So those of us who take to this yoga must also take up the Sankhya Yoga, Sankhya philosophy, because they go together. But in Sri Aurobindo, now let's see in the Gita. Now in the Gita also, these are not separated. They are taken as concurrent ways, as Sri Aurobindo calls, of approaching the realization. So this is one place where the Gita has not separated, it has taken the old practices itself. Because it says Sankhya and Yoga must be practiced together. The Gita recognizes no real difference in their teachings. Still less need we discuss the theories with regard the Gita as a fruit of some particular religious system or tradition. Its teaching is universal, whatever may have been its origins. Just we talked about it yesterday, that the philosophy of the Gita or the yoga of the Gita was already existent before the Mahabharata itself. We have seen Sankhya and Yoga already existent before the Gita came into being. We have seen Upanishads already existent. So Gita is a quintessence of the Upanishads. It is even said very often that if the Upanishads are compared to a cow, the Gita is the milk of the cow. That is the quintessence of the Upanishads. So we have something already pre-existing. So it is said, Shri Krishna has given us what is already there. But Sri Aurobindo is telling us here, I am not interested in going into all these practices if there were a tradition or a philosophy pre-existent. He is kind of taking the Bhagavad Gita as it is, without all these connections of the past or the tradition or this or that. Even, like this Gita is saying, I don't want to take the Sankhya philosophy as it is, but take the best of it. So Sri Aurobindo is saying that I am going to take the Gita here as it is and the experience behind it. So he is not going to go into the embellishments, he is taking it straight away. That is the second aspect. Please remember, we are following the same concept that Gita is universal, first of all in its terms, secondly in its philosophic ideas, which those seem Sankhya and Yoga and Upanishadic have their own validity and independence. Now third point, the philosophical system of the Gita, its arrangement of truth, is not that part of its teaching which is the most vital, profound, eternally durable, but most of the material of which the system is composed, the principal ideas suggestive and penetrating, which are woven into its complex harmony, are eternally valuable and valid. For they are not merely the luminous ideas or striking speculations of a philosophic intellect, but rather enduring truths of spiritual experience, verifiable facts of our highest psychological possibilities, which no attempt to read deeply the mystery of existence can afford to neglect. So what is the third point? It says, we have seen the philosophic ideas are universal. Then it says, what is again universal is the principal ideas suggestive and penetrating. What are those principal ideas? We have already got an inkling of that in the first para. What is the nature of our human being? The gunas. What is the question of our swabhava and swadharma? What is the question of duty? Do we do a work for the sake of duty or because it is an expression of your swabhava? Or else this question of the two natures, para prakriti and apara prakriti, the higher level and the lower level. And then you have the three purushas, Kshara Purusha, Akshara Purusha and Purushottama. So these are the principal ideas. You see, in the Gita, you have a lot of conversations, which is higher, Karma Yoga is better, or Jnana Yoga is better, or who is a greater devotee, etc., etc. It says all those philosophic ideas, all those discussions we can leave aside, but take the principal ideas. And why should we take these principal ideas? Because they are here, as it says, spiritual experiences and they are verifiable facts. Even today, we can experience the Purushottama. Even now we know what is Swabhava. This Sattva, Rajas, Tamas are these three gunas which we can verify. So some of these, somebody may say, well, I don't agree with Arjuna and Sri Krishna that Karma Yoga is more important than Jnana Yoga. Okay, all that we are not discussing. These are philosophic ideas, preferential. But now, can we deny the fact that we can experience the Purushottama? No. It is verifiable. Can we deny the fact that there is a higher nature and a lower nature? Apara Prakriti and Para Prakriti. This also we cannot, because we feel it, we can experience it within our own being. We have the lower nature and we have the higher nature. So like that he is telling us, all these principal ideas are based on a spiritual experience which can be had in any time. Today is 2006, tomorrow it may be 2206 or 2500. These are eternal spiritual experiences. So always remember, a spiritual experience has no limitation of time. It is timeless. That is why when the Vedas told us something about the Brahman, after 15,000 years also, the same concept of Brahman is applicable today. It is not a concept, it is a spiritual experience. So we have, Sri Aurobindo is going to mark on that. And then he says, whatever the system may be, it is not, as the commentators strive to make it, framed or intended to support any exclusive school of philosophical thought or to put forward predominantly the claims of any one form of yoga. This is again we need to remember, but unfortunately this has not been followed. Because people have said that Gita supports the Karma Yoga or Gita supports the Jnana Yoga. But Sri Aurobindo is saying no, it does not support any one particular marga, any particular path. It is a total synthetic vision. The last point now is the language. The language of the Gita, the structure of thought, the combination and balancing of ideas belong neither to the temper of a sectarian teacher nor to the spirit of a rigorous analytical dialectics cutting off one angle of the truth to exclude all the others, but rather there is a wide, undulating, encircling movement of ideas which is a manifestation of a vast synthetic mind and a rich synthetic experience. I think this sentence applies verbatim to the life divine itself. There is no cutting off of any one argument. You see, that's where there is a similarity between the Gita's approach and Sri Aurobindo, that they have not cut out anything. There is, as it says, it is neither dialectics, which says this is wrong, that is right, nor is it a kind of a sectarian teacher trying to promote his own thinking, his own experience. So Sri Krishna is that vast synthetic mind and a synthetic experience which is really embracing all that went before him. Exactly the same thing that Sri Aurobindo does in the life divine and in all his writings. Even here, he would do the same thing. So this embracive attitude is what is great about the Gita. It is a synthetic mind and a synthetic experience. So we should not label the Gita as any one philosophy. You can't even call it Hindu philosophy. You can't even call it Hindu scripture. It has gone beyond the boundaries of any nomenclature of any culture. It was born in India, fine. But it has surpassed, it has gone beyond its boundaries of Indian culture, because a spiritual experience is basically a universal one. You cannot call it belonging to any particular country. This is one of those great syntheses in which Indian spirituality has been as rich as in its creation of the more intensive, exclusive movements of knowledge and religious realization that follow out with an absolute concentration, one clue, one path to its extreme issues. It does not cleave asunder, but reconciles and unifies. Sri Aurobindo recognizes both the movements. India has had the great genius I mean, really you would wonder at it, if you really go into the deep spiritual trend of India, that how on one side there's a constant synthesis. On one side there is always an attempt at synthesis. And on the other side there is exclusive movements of knowledge and religious realization. So we in India have been experts in both. That there is a diversification, an immense diversification. So we encourage oppositions, diversification, really going to the extreme. In fact, in his book, The Foundations of Indian, not the foundation, the Renaissance in India, Sri Aurobindo particularly mentions the genius of the country is that it has gone to the extremes of spiritual experimentation. And we have seen it in Shankara itself and in Ramanuja itself. On one side we say Brahman alone is true and the earth and the world is mithya. On the other side you say the earth is the truth and Brahman is a mithya. Apart from that, extreme practices, yogic practices, meditation for hours together, going on a fasting, torturing the body. I mean, you have a whole range of spiritual experiences here. But at the same time, there comes a particular time in Indian history when all these are gathered up into a single synthesis. That's what we have seen yesterday, that at every stage there is a kind of a tying up. There's a kind of a tying up of the whole thing. So this is the richness of the country, a tremendous variety and a point of synthesis. And that is where, if I can apply the same analysis today, I would say what Sri Aurobindo has given us would again give place to this variety of thinking, variety of schools of thought in integral yoga itself. I'm quite sure of that. Because Gita gave birth to so many schools of thought, so many different practices, so many ways. Similarly, Sri Aurobindo, what he has given us today, down the line of time, there will be many, many schools of thought, all based on integral yoga and philosophy. That's why West and East and South and North, we will have our own interpretations. And Sri Aurobindo will not be against it. Because this is the genius of the country, that it multiplies. So one seed is put and there are hundreds of trees that come up. So this will be, I'm sure, what will happen to Sri Aurobindo's own philosophy. And he says, this is India. We have given exclusive movements of knowledge on one side and we have given the synthesis of all these movements. So this is a trend that we hardly find in any other culture or philosophy and religion, the synthesis aspect. They have developed diversification, but there is hardly a kind of a synthesis that comes in, not many. So this is the language. So we have seen the terms, we have seen the philosophical ideas, we have seen the main concepts, and we see this language itself, which is a beautiful way of saying there's a wide, undulating, encircling movement of ideas. Read the Life Divine, you see a perfect example of this. Wide, undulating and circular, encircling movement. That's why in the Life Divine you don't see any idea being rejected. All the time there is this encircling. Now the last point, this is very crucial too. The thought of the Gita is not pure monism, although it sees in one unchanging, pure, eternal self the foundation of all cosmic existence, nor Mayavada, although it speaks of the Maya of the three modes of Prakriti, omnipresent in the created world, nor is it qualified monism, although it places in the one his eternal supreme Prakriti manifested in the form of the Jiva, and lays most stress on dwelling in God rather than dissolution as the supreme state of spiritual consciousness, nor is it Sankhya, although it explains the created world by the double principle of Purusha and Prakriti, nor is it Vaishnava theism, although it presents to us Krishna, who is the avatar of Vishnu, according to the Puranas, as the supreme deity, and allows no essential difference nor any actual superiority of the status of the indefinable relationless Brahman over that of which this Lord of beings, who is the master of the universe and the friend of all creatures. Well, it's a very compact line. He has covered many ideas and many parts of thought. First, how would you call the philosophy of the Gita? Here, some people call Aurobindo philosophy Purna Advaita. We have called this integral philosophy Purna Advaita. That means is the full, complete, integral Advaita. But can you label the Gita in any of these terms? If you call it monism, because he says that there is only one Supreme Purushottama, you cannot call it monism, although the Gita says there is the one Purushottama. It does not deny this world. Like the Advaita, Shankaracharya Advaita says there is only one Supreme and the world is a mithya and illusion. That is the pure monism. But Gita cannot be called pure monism, because although it says there is only one Brahman, one Purushottama, the world also exists. So it cannot be called monism. Is it a Mayavada? Although it speaks of the Maya of the three modes of Prakriti, now here, can we call this Gita a Mayavad, which is really encouraging the system of the Mayavad? He says no, because here we cannot call the Gita a Mayavad for the obvious reason that it establishes the three gunas. In fact, he says the modes of Prakriti omnipresent in the created world. He said this world is true. It is not an illusion. So it cannot be called Mayavad also. And not only is it true, he would say these modes, the Sattva, Rajas and Tamas, are eternal qualities of this Prakriti, of this world. So you see, this world also has got some eternality about it, eternal qualities about it. So how can there be a Mayavad? Because Mayavad says that this world is a temporary phenomenal reality. But ultimately, when you realize the Brahman, this world vanishes. Vanishes for you, of course, not for everybody. But Sri Krishna would say, even if you realize the psychic being of the Purushottama, the world will not even vanish for you also. That's exactly what happened to Sri Aurobindo. When he realized the Brahman, the world did not vanish for him. It continued to be. The only thing is, now he understands better the world, now he understands the future destiny of the world, how the evolution is taking place and all that. So, Gita also cannot be called a Mayavad system. Next, can you call it a qualified monism? Qualified monism is what we get in Ramanuja. That is, the Brahman is true, but we have the Jiva aspect. That means we have the soul. So there are two entities, Brahman and Atman, both are true. So it is called the qualified monism. That means it is not only the pure Brahman, but also there is the Jiva, or in our simpler terms, the Jivatman or the Atman. So can we call this a qualified monism? But he says, although it places in the one his eternal supreme Prakriti manifested in the form of the Jiva, and lays more stress on dwelling in God rather than dissolution as the supreme state of spiritual consciousness. We cannot call the Gita as a qualified monism, because in the qualified monism, what is the ideal? That you merge yourself in the Purushottama or the Brahman and lose yourself in that consciousness. But in the Gita, it is not so. You have the Atman, the soul, the psychic being, you have the Purushottama. And what is the philosophy, or what is the message of the Gita? That you station yourself in the Gita, in the Atman, and be dynamic outside. So this is the mode of action of the Gita. You see, what we said in the Sankhya, we are not to be losing ourselves completely in Prakriti. But not do we reject the Prakriti. Because Prakriti is the instrumentation of your expression of your inner being. Like if I say, I want to really write something, I can't write with my fingers. I need an instrument called the pen. So similarly, if the soul wants to express something or experience something, it cannot do directly. It needs our physical, our mental, our vital instrumentation. So what the Gita would tell us is, if you act by your ego, you are in problem. If you act stationed in your inner being, that is the true way of action. So we cannot call it that you lose yourself in the Brahman, but what it is, you station yourself in the Brahman. Stationing and loosening, there's a lot of difference. So you station yourself in inner consciousness, and that's what the Mother and Aurobindo also tell us. The action should come from within outwards. Whenever you have to take a decision or to see what is going to happen, the way I have to do it, you don't take it directly a mental parameter. Let not your mind jump into conclusion or jump into prejudices or jump into decisions. You withdraw for a moment and consult. The word we can say is consult your inner being. You may say, no, Ananda, I don't even know what my inner being is, how can I consult? When you want to consult with somebody, you need to know the person, the name and the form and the residence. But this is a psychological approach. This inner withdrawal, if practiced regularly, really takes you inward. And there is a kind of a space within, the time space, and you will see it if you can practice that, and I've seen it myself. That if you left to mind, you have taken a certain decision, but then you say, no, sorry, hold on. Let me ask my inner being. I don't know what it is, I don't know where it is. But the very stance that I want to say, halt to my mind, and as the Mother says, dip within. That dipping, you can ask the Mother to say, Mother, what exactly do you want me to do? So you can ask this question bluntly within. If you say, I don't know how to dip in, at least you know how to ask this in English. If you hesitate that, it will be difficult. So this dipping in is what Sri Krishna also encourages, that stand inside, take your station on your witness Purusha and act. So, it is not the qualified monism. Aurobindo is trying to really make Gita really universal. People have dragged it by language, by school of thought, by karma yoga and this and that, and calling it monism, calling it this, calling it that. So Aurobindo, what he is doing in the first chapter is really clearing up all the cobwebs of human mental approach to the Gita. So it's clearing it up, the whole field, so that when we start with the second chapter and we have the divine teacher straight away, so we have the pure Gita in front of us. Otherwise he's kind of, clearing up all our prejudices. Because we have come here when we read, you say, I've read the Shankaracharya, I've read this Bhashya, I've read this school of thought, this Hare Krishna movement has brought about an interpretation. We have read so many. So Aurobindo says, keep all that baggage out. I don't want to deal with all that. So this is the way he is helping us to understand the Gita and its purity. Now last one. So it is not Sankhya. Obviously we have seen it already, because he does not believe, he does not take the double principle of Sankhya. So Gita cannot be called a Sankhya. Nor is it Vaishnava theism. This is something which has taken roots in the Hare Krishna movement, the Vaishnava theism. That Prabhupada went from Bengal. In Bengal, there is complete dominance of the Vaishnava theism. Vaishnavism is there, very dominant. There are two schools of thought, one of the Shakti aspect, the Kali, the Shakti, the other is the Vaishnavism. The very strong trends in Bengal. And this gentleman went from Vaishnavism to states at the behest of his guru, whatever the story is. So he establishes this kind of a Vaishnavism as a creed, but he has dragged in the Bhagavad Gita. Obviously, he has made it into a religion. And so therefore we see that Gita, according to the Hare Krishna movement, would be a Vaishnava theism. They would say yes, because the Lord, Sri Krishna, is the Supreme Lord. So we must all worship the Supreme Lord, and that is the only salvation. Aurobindo says no. Although Sri Krishna himself tells in the Bhagavad Gita that I am the Purushottama, he himself declares that. In spite of that, he says, we cannot call it a Vaishnava theism, because he says, although it presents to us Krishna, who is the avatar of Vishnu, according to the Puranas, as the supreme deity and allows no essential difference nor any actual superiority of the status of the indefinable relationless Brahman over that of this Lord, who is the master. So he also would not take it as a Vaishnava theism, because Sri Krishna also speaks of the impersonal Brahman. You see how Sri Krishna escapes, or the Bhagavad Gita escapes all this labeling, is because he has got every aspect. So one side he says, I am the Purushottama. The other side he says, Purushottama consists of Kshara Purusha and the Akshara Purusha. So he has two aspects. So you can approach any one of his aspects. So if you go by the impersonal aspect, it is not theism. It becomes atheism. If you go by the theistic aspect, the personal aspect, it becomes theism. So Gita is this wonderful scripture which escapes all kinds of sectarianism, all kinds of classification. You cannot say Gita is the greatest theistic work because Lord Krishna is the great avatar. But the same avatar says, I am also the impersonal Brahman. So what do you take it to be the finale? So the finale would be, like the earlier spiritual synthesis of the Upanishad, this later synthesis, at once spiritual and intellectual, avoids naturally every such rigid determination as would injure its universal comprehensiveness. Its aim is precisely the opposite to that of the polemist commentators, who found this scripture established as one of the three highest Vedantic authorities and attempted to turn it into a weapon of offense and defense against other schools of system. So you see, all this, not all, maybe we should not exaggerate, there have been so many schools of thought, like you see, for example, the Buddhism, for example. Buddhism was so strong in its logic. But to counter Buddhism, we had this Nyaya philosophy. Nyaya school of thought was again extremely strong in its logic. So in India, there has been this trend of counter-attacking. If a school of thought was there was something else that attacked it. That is how, in fact, it grew. Not in competition, but seeing on logical level, if Buddhism says this, can Hinduism reply to Buddhism? So that's how Nyaya came against that. And Shankaracharya again, when he came after 1,000 years, he brings in an attack on Buddhism, saying that Buddhism is not right in these lines. So there have been lots of these movements, conflicts, but which have on the contrary enriched Indian philosophy. On the contrary, which have really enriched in the sense, made this Indian scope so vast, not stuck to one belief saying, no, Buddha is the supreme, or the Gita is the supreme, or the Vedas is the supreme. Nothing has been the supreme. So there has been tremendous flexibility. And this is what he says, Gita has always escaped any kind of a particular classification. So the Gita is not a weapon for dialectical warfare. It's a gate opening on the whole world of spiritual truth and experience, and the view it gives us embraces all the provinces of that supreme region. It maps out, but it does not cut up or build walls or hedges to confine our vision. Well, I'm taking time to read out all this because, as I said, we have to clear our own minds before we really take up the essays on the Gita. Otherwise, you will have lots of questions. You will say, this Guru has said like that and that Guru has said like that. Even Shankara Bhashya has said something. You will have conflicts in your mind. So Aurobindo is extremely clear here that do not bring in Gita as a weapon for dialectical warfare, which was done in the past. But it says, now what is my attitude? Not to use Gita as against any other philosophy of thought, and to only and exclusively concentrate on its universality. So you can see a man whose stance, whose position is universal. He is not bringing in his own philosophy, number one, please remember. Although he is master of integralism, he will not push through integral yoga into the Gita's yoga, which has been done with everyone else. He is not one of those polemist commentators supporting one view and not the other. So ultimately, he himself says in the last paragraph of this book, of this chapter, our object then in studying the Gita will not be a scholastic or academical scrutiny of its thought, nor to place its philosophy in the history of metaphysical speculation, nor shall we deal with it in the manner of the analytical dialectism. We approach it for help and light, and our aim must be to distinguish its essential and living message, that in it on which humanity has to seize for its perfection and its highest spiritual welfare. So, in the last line he says, this is my approach. That I am not trying to be clever, not trying to be one-upmanship here, not trying to be analytical dialectism because that leads you nowhere. It's not scholastic or analytical. That is why I said that Essays on the Gita is not an easy book. Because normally we think it to be a propounding of the main ideas of the Bhagavad Gita itself. But Sri Aurobindo is looking for its essential and living message. And this essential and living message is the one that can really touch us very deeply because it really leads to a spiritual experience. And therefore, all these principal ideas that is going to touch here, the avatar, the Purusha, the two Purushas, the disciple, works and sacrifice, all this, remember, he is clarifying only to tell us how this will lead you to your inner being, inner experience. And not for the sake of saying the Essays on the Gita is a better book than the Shankara Bhashya, or it's a better book than this commentator. No, he says, I'm not interested in all that. So he is a real spiritual seeker trying to find in the Gita what are those gems which can help me personally. So if there are people who cannot understand Sri Aurobindo or who have difficulty in taking to Sri Aurobindo, well, that's what we said. Essays on the Gita is a perfect and a wonderful book as a spiritual guide. In fact, I would say it is a very practical book for sadhana. I mean, of course, after this, which I said is a kind of a prelude to the synthesis of yoga. So if you want to understand the synthesis also, we must first read the Essays on the Gita. We think we can straight away jump into synthesis of yoga because we have such a prejudice that synthesis alone belongs to Sri Aurobindo and the essays belongs to the past avatar called the Sri Krishna and it's an old thing and all that. But on the contrary, synthesis cannot be understood if you do not read the essays on the Gita. Because all those concepts, because there he has really dealt very much in brief. Because he has already written all that in the essays on the Gita and at a great extensive level. So friends, I think the study that we are going to take up is essential for understanding the synthesis. The study of which I do in the evening classes at Hall of Harmony. But there also I am able to do that because I have already done this book, Essays on the Gita, part 2 as I said, line by line in the Hall of Harmony. In fact, it was a nice, the very good order I went into. First I finished the Essays on the Gita, then I took the synthesis. So my explanations are inspired actually basically from the Essays on the Gita. Even now I refer constantly to the essays in order to understand the concepts in the synthesis. Well, we will halt at that.